Hi, I'm Robin Pecknold from Fleet Foxes, and this is the LSQ podcast.
Robin Pecknold, hi. Welcome to the LSQ podcast. It's good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too. Thank you so much for talking to me.
I didn't think that I would be able to adjust to doing interviews this way on Zoom. I truly had never interviewed anyone on Zoom or similar before a few months ago. And initially I was like, I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. That's not what the show is. I'm going to just wait until it's safe to have people to my apartment again for interviews or to meet up with them. And it's been interesting to kind of explore how an interview works differently in this situation, but also the way it's still the same. And yeah, I'm here in my closet and you're there where you are, and we're still able to do this. So thank you so much for, going through the steps it takes to do things this way nowadays.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, I'm sure I've experienced a little bit of this, just feeling like it's great to be able to connect with people, even though it has to be over Zoom,
Well, yeah, and then we can be wherever in the world we are and still do these conversations. We don't have to wait to necessarily be in the same city. But, part of the reason I'm saying that is that I know, I've read, your statement about the new album Sure, and I know from other things I've seen articles about it that, the similar thing for you in these past several months was kind of wrapping your head around, do I just put aside the thing I was working on before this, or do I adapt to this situation? So tell me a little bit about that moment in this album when you had to figure out what to do with what you'd made last year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it took a couple months to make sense of how to finish it, and that decision, like you're saying, to adapt or just abandon it, but we all are going to have to adapt. I feel like this isn't, things aren't going to change for a little while, and better to adapt than to kind of wait for things to get back to normal, and I think, most of the music was pretty developed back in February, back in March. It was just a kind of matter of executing it. There was still left to do, but I didn't have any of the lyrics written. For whatever reason, I had just really not prioritized writing lyrics. I guess I was just so focused on musical elements and musical ideas that I wasn't, really thinking about words, and I wasn't really in that mindset for some reason. I was just kind of working on music, go. And then for me, yeah, this 3-month forced isolation of that early period of quarantine was just kind of became this opportunity to reflect and kind of plan for how the album would get finished, but then kind of actually get some work done on the lyrics for the first time.
Do you think that it would have been a totally different album if it just, in a parallel universe where the pandemic didn't happen, where 2020 didn't happen the way it did, would the words have been different? Would the final execution of it have felt different to you, do you think?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. I mean, I think there was a string session that got canceled for logistical reasons. We had string arrangements all done, and then at first for logistical reasons, then later for kind of budget reasons, where I just felt like I can just get this done easier if we just power through in the studio, just me and Beatrice recording, and it'll be cheaper. And then lyrically, I don't know what it would have been about had a pandemic not totally changed things.
I guess I mean even in the more meta sense, because because of the way that we've all had to let go some of our ego attachment to whatever we're doing, and be a little bit more simultaneously like reflecting on the things that we're saying and putting out into the world, the things we really can stand by in this time, but also trusting yourself, and I was intrigued by some of the stuff that you've said about this, about kind of this album being a moment to be less critical of yourself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, it was interesting. You start out making music, you love albums, you want to make albums, and, that's what you want to do. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get good at that, and that's what I wanted to devote my life to. And, before the pandemic, the album, in addition to being like this artistic statement, was kind of a vessel for a 2-year tour or a big press campaign or a it facilitated all of this kind of commercial activity as well, And so when all that seemed to kind of fade away or be deprioritized or just no longer an option, as devastating as that is in so many ways, it also just let the album be an album by itself to me, finishing it. And it didn't, it meant the music, it was the only thing, it was the only aspect of the quote unquote campaign was the album, basically. So it just kind of, I don't know, it made it feel a little more pure in that way. And a little less, there's less, I think every musician, if you were expecting to play the Hollywood Bowl and now you're sitting at home, that's definitely like an ego, a very good and welcome ego diffusion.
And also, yeah, I would imagine for you, I've always sort of perceived that some of that the commerce of music was an aspect of doing what you do that's not like your favorite part or something. And for a lot of artists, I think like having to figure out the ways to commercialize, what you're making and look for the different commercial outlets for it is just such a kind of a punishment in a way, even though it's the thing that allows you to keep doing it. And so having fewer commercial outlets to even worry about, and not having to worry about touring, because touring's exhausting, right? So it must be a relief in a way to know that it's possible to adapt to putting out albums without touring, and it's not the end of the world. 2020 may feel like the end of the world, but in our micro sense, like the things that we do, if we have to adapt, that's not what's going to kill us. I appreciated something you wrote in your statement about music being essential, and how we don't need it to live, but what is, it is still an essential thing. And I wonder when you first in your life had that feeling of connection to music, that it was like an essential thing to you.
Man, first moment it was essential. I mean, my dad would play, he was a luthier and a bass guitarist, and he played guitar, and, he was playing music all the time when we were growing up, and so I think that definitely imprinted on me subconsciously. And it was, after dinner every night he would sit down and put like a Steely Dan album on, or like a Tower of Power album or something that I thought was corny at the time, and he would play bass along with it, And so it was just a kind of an everyday thing for us, and that, I'm definitely my father's son in that sense, that I kind of, that remains like the thing I feel compelled to do, and the thing that when I get to do it, I feel really like healed and kind of really feel like myself,
But who were the first artists where you thought, okay, that dad has dad's music and this is my music?
First one was probably Cat Stevens, if I want to say, that when I was like 6, but then it was like Nirvana and Pearl Jam when I was 8. I guess 94 I was 8. And being grown up in Seattle and having that stuff be so, just to be from this town that, it wasn't New York, it wasn't LA, but the best, most popular music in the world was coming from Seattle. That also had a huge impact on me.
Damn, yeah. Did you know when you first saw Nirvana on MTV or something like that? Oh, did you have an awareness of them as a local band before they were massive?
I think I did a tiny bit, but not, I was pretty young, but I had older siblings, and it wasn't really until they were on MTV, etc., that it was, super significant to me. But, it immediately made put Seattle on the map for even people in Seattle, and kids in Seattle. And so definitely Nirvana was the first band.
But also, you were a fan, so you were a fan already as a little kid of Nirvana, and then the singer kills himself. Right?
Yeah, that was crazy, because I remember listening to the news report about that driving home from school. That they were, and then getting back home and turning the TV on, and it was like breaking news live. Helicopters at the house in Magnolia that they lived at. That was the day he committed suicide was very intense.
Yeah, was that? Was that that must? I'm guessing that was how you found out what suicide was, possibly.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, totally.
Part of the reason that I'm asking about that is because there's a song on on Shore about artist heroes of yours who we've lost to suicide. And I mean, I guess I'm curious. Like, were you freaked out that Kurt Cobain died? Were you sad at 8 years old that Kurt Cobain died?
So sad. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, we were so sad. And then again, I know we're getting it hit even harder when Elliott Smith obviously committed suicide, or the circumstances of that are in question. But when Elliott Smith passed away, then he was my guy when I was like 16, 17. Elliott was the king, and he was down in Portland, and it was weird. I guess it was strange to grow up and have kind of local heroes at different ages kind of get taken from me, in that way.
Do you think you attached to something in the music that was coming from that place of like melancholy, and that's why you were a fan already?
Yeah, I think I've gravitated towards you know more melancholy music at certain times. Elliott Smith is a perfect soundtrack to like teenage angst for sure, and I think Nirvana I just liked when I was 8. I just liked because it was like loud and really had amazing melodies. He doesn't get enough credit for the quality of those melodies.
So, did music soothe you? I mean, were you the artists that you were listening to, would it make you feel better when you listened to their songs?
For sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean it's such a I still listen to music for that reason. That's like the main, especially now, listening to the radio a lot more than I used to, just letting someone else pick the music for me, in 2020, and then just listening to really like, yeah, soothing, healing music. Like it's nothing else works like that. It just we need music more than ever now, I think, and it's always been a source of comfort and joy for me for sure.
Does writing songs and making your own music like evoke that same kind of feeling? Is that the feeling you're going for when you're creating?
I feel like after if I spend like an hour trying to write a song, I do feel pretty good afterwards, almost like I just done like a I don't know, I don't really do yoga, but like if I'd done like a yoga class or something where it's like I so in that way, and I get a little bit agitated if I spend too much time without working on something. And I think that's kind of as I'm realizing that more and more as I get older, that's like kind of what keeps me doing it every day. Is it's kind of just this like more of a quote unquote practice. Um,
Do you write every day?
I when I have the space for it, I like to at least try something every day in a kind of non-judgmental way, but just in that way where you sit down, you like commune with something and see what happens, and just be curious and not like, okay, I need to sit down and write like a hit song right now.
And is that would that usually be with a guitar or
Yeah,
what's
guitar.
and so you just sit there and hold it and wait for the feeling to come?
Yeah.
Do you find that in all of your, I know you've been traveling a lot, over the course of, well, making sure and since, do you find that the environment affects how much comes to you or how creative you feel or how productive you are? Which sorts of environments bring out the most in you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've always loved working in different environments just because something about being in an unfamiliar place obviously um, puts you in that mindset. Like if you go on a hike, it always feels twice as long on the way to the destination than it feels on the way back. Because you're just attuned to your surroundings in a kind of like, an almost like evolutionary, like, am I safe kind of sense. And that's such a great mindset to be in. I think for being creative because you're it just new things feel possible. Certain space, like if you're just in your apartment day after day, like you've exhausted those possibilities maybe, whatever had come of that space. So I do like changing location a lot when working on something, just as a way of accessing that. And I don't think it needs to be any like particularly beautiful location or anything. I think it just needs to be new, needs to be fresh. And I think that can help. You know, if you have you compile 50 minutes of music into an album, if that's 10 minutes of music each from 5 different places, there'll be a little more variety to that, than if it was all just made in one spot. I think
And when did you start writing songs?
I started writing songs when I was 14. I have two older siblings, and our dad got us all the same three models of all the same Martin guitar for Christmas one year, and because he got a discount at the store on buying three of the same guitar. I guess I had too many, and and I was the first one to kind of pick it up and learn it, and I learned Times Are Changing. That was the first song I learned, and it was really hard, and then I gave up for a few months, but then I got because it really hurt my hands. So but then I got back into it, and I started writing songs almost immediately, and then got really into Elliott, and there was like a great internet kind of fan community around like Elliott Smith, and in terms of people like starting websites and transcribing his songs, because they're so complicated in certain ways, but so like once you figure it out as a kid learning guitar, it's so satisfying to be recreating the thing that you love on the album so much, with your own two hands. And so I got really into Elliott, and then really into Joni Mitchell websites, because her tunings are crazy too. And then that same kind of like, the ability to make this, recreate this really unique sound. I got super into that as a teenager, and that was what kept me going. And then, I'd be in one tuning of a Joni song or something, and then I'd make up my own chord in that tuning, and then I started writing songs like that. And I was just really, I don't know, I would write songs, terrible songs constantly, and I just totally loved it. I loved it so much.
When did it start to feel like something that you might do as like the thing that you do?
I felt so passionate about it as a teenager that I think every other possibility started to seem unlikely, or I just felt like that was what I was going to do, and that was what I felt passionate towards. And then I was also kind of absorbing the weird mythologies around, like, the Beatles were 20 years old when they came to America, and Brian Wilson was 22 when he made blah blah blah. So if you take that nonsense kind of too seriously, then you're like, okay, I only have a few years to get to make a masterpiece, or and that was a much that just seemed like such a harder thing to do, and such a kind of I don't know, I got so much energy from wanting to do that, rather than like, okay, I'm going to go to college when I'm 18 and maybe I'll get a degree in something and figure it out. But that seemed less exciting to me at that age than just going fully on music. And I was in the perfect city for it, because Seattle was still a huge music town. It was very affordable to live there at the time, and it just felt possible. It's the right size city. And so many great clubs and so many great people making music there, that it was just like, this is what I'm going to do. This is, I'm in the right place, and this is in my family's history, and this is what I want.
And so what did you do from there? I mean, how quickly did that evolve? Did you have bands before you started Fleet Foxes?
I played in one band when I was 19 on a tour called Delore. It was kind of a like Beach Boys influenced pop band. And then I was already kind of doing Fleet Foxes. We were doing, I don't know if we'd done like a full band show yet, but I just did that one tour. But I played a lot of open mics and a lot of solo before that. And I'd been making solo EPs and going to coffee houses and playing that way.
Yeah. And I mean, how would you say your approach to songwriting has changed most significantly since then?
Well, I think back then it was, just trying to zero in on how to, I mean, there's just so many facets to it. I feel like I could just answer that question for the next hour.
Give it to me.
Well, because, there's the kind of mechanical process of like sitting down and finding good melodies, and melodies aren't very interesting to talk about because it's just a good one or it's not. I guess you can just, you can try and divine why one melody is good and one isn't. And there are certain properties of good melodies that I guess you could analyze, but it's not that interesting to talk about. But then there are all these other elements that are like interesting to talk about, like stylistic choices, genre choices, extra narrative choices about decisions the band made, or where something was recorded, or the when I was first starting out, it was just, how do you construct a song and how do you get from point A to point B, just trying to figure that out was enough. And I wasn't even really thinking about it as a personal thing. It was just like, how do you make a good song? Not even like, how do I express myself? It was more like, I wasn't thinking about expressing myself or like trying to find the thing that felt like the thing only I could do or something like that. It was really just like, what are the mechanics of songwriting and how do I make something compelling? Because the difference between, it's one of those things where the difference between a great song and a bad song can be pretty hard to discern. And the difference between an incredible song and a great song can be even harder. There are these just ineffable things that you can't put your finger on. And so I think the mystery of that was compelling to me. I guess as I've gotten older, I hope that I still have that knowledge about how to construct a song and what a song is. I think at certain times I've thought more about, pushing against that and making longer songs, but that's not like, that's not an innovation of the 21st century. There have been long songs for hundreds of years. It's not like, it's just, exercising a different muscle or trying to find a different way of, making songs long but coherent, And then I think like more and more it's just kind of like wanting to express, I guess, it sounds dumb, but like wanting to express myself or feel like the thing that I'm saying really means something to me and that it's interacting with the music in a way that makes it worth being in song form, and then still kind of remaining, amazed and intrigued by the ways albums kind of control people's perceptions of time, the ways a song can be incredible but built out of very simple components, the ways songs playing with someone's expectations or subverting them or reinforcing them, how that, playing with the kind of back and forth of that and how someone's experiencing the music. Those things remain really interesting to me, but I guess I think about them more than I would when I was first starting out.
Do you think there are rules about those things, though? I don't know. My tendency hearing you say that is like, I can imagine how useful it would be as like in the beginning of your kind of creative journey to be studying like the masters, whoever your masters are, and trying to learn like truly how did they do that? How do they do it? What's their technique? But at a certain point, I would imagine, especially after making as much music as you've made at this point, it's just like anything's a song, isn't it? I mean, do you feel still wedded to that idea when you're looking at some new work of analyzing it according to what you think a song is? Or
I agree that anything is a song. I think that it's weird to me that it's interesting to me that song form seemed to congeal into something in terms of intro, verse, chorus, verse, bridge, chorus, or whatever you want to segment it out. It's interesting that seemed to develop, and that the length of it seemed to settle at around 3.5 minutes, and that an album length settled somewhere around 40. And those kinds of things, can you say that those are
yeah, I guess I can't. I get stuck on the aspect of it that is like that's like the man. Some of it's just the man. Like why is an album, or it's just like the universe. Why is an album a certain length? Because you can only fit so many minutes on a vinyl album when that was the way to make an album. Why are there a certain number of songs on an album? Because of the way publishing works. And then the question of a song, obviously, that's different. It's like, how much attention span do we have is more, I guess, the question of, like, what is, like, the perfect song length or something. When did you start to feel like just, I have my own, like, how early into making music did you start to feel like, I have my own instincts. I don't need to compare myself to the way Dylan or Elliott or whoever else did it. I'm just going to do what I do.
I don't know that I was conscious of that until relatively recently. I think that until maybe 5 years ago, I was just almost more of a music fan than a musician in terms of my self-assessment, because so much of what I was thinking about, so much of the value in music to me was kind of bringing different older things into conversation, and then kind of proving that you could do that you understood it well enough to kind of not recreate it, but to kind of synthesize it effectively, and in a way that didn't feel like dilettantish. I think that was, especially because, working in genres that have this kind of question of authenticity, like folk music, acoustic music, pop music less so. That can be kind of a motivating factor, like to prove that you know how to do it for real, and that there is an it that needs to be done for real, and that some people don't do it that way, and that they're invalid artists for that reason. And then I think that that's less of a thought for me now, and maybe it's only in the last 5 years that I've been like, I know, I don't need necessarily need like, a pat on the back from the guy at the record store anymore, to kind of keep me going. But I can kind of explore these other things or things that are maybe more interesting to me than kind of, I'm proving to you that I can write a folk song as good as a Bert Jansch song or something,
Right, and then having to deal with, and I read something you said about this in a recent interview about, what I guess what's known as like the anxiety of influence, like, learning to deal with the anxiety of being attached to your audible influences, like what you're saying, where you're like, I know how to do this, but also don't confuse me with that. I'm not ripping that off as, the thing that everyone fears being accused of. Like it's kind of funny because this podcast, like, in a way focuses on the question that is the most prosaic question in a music interview, which is, what are your influences? It's like the corniest, most entry level question, and yet, like, there's something to it, where it's like, if you can get past feeling harangued by an awareness of your influences, and like, no, don't anybody talk about it, if you can get past that, it's like, it is such a key thing. The things that are the foundation for what you're reacting to or comparing yourself to or trying to reach, like, that's meaningful. And then you just have to trust that, because it's you, an individual human who will only ever exist once in history, Robin Pecknold, like, automatically it's different from your influences. Like, no one else can make what you make.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's one weird thing about being like 10-ish years into doing this, is like, at this point I feel like a fairly different person from the person making the first Fleet Foxes album, but I'm building a discography. It's almost like Fleet Foxes is an influence on Fleet Foxes, and you're kind of like, well, my primary influence now is this folk pop album from 2008 that I really love. Can't get over it.
Do you think that you would have called your project Fleet Foxes if you were? I mean, because it has always. I know that there are, this ongoing band supporting you, and that there are contributions from them in the music, but it's been your thing kind of since the beginning, and certainly I can imagine at this point you must have moments where you think, am I a solo art? Like, I mean, have you ever thought about what would a Robin Pecknold album be? How would that be different from a Fleet Foxes album?
I think that, part of the fun of doing music to me was the project thought, that, I don't know that I would do a solo album or a solo career. I don't. Part of it is to kind of like divert attention onto this name of a thing that isn't you, and just be like, I'm making music for this name. And even if you're always written all the songs or recorded most of the stuff, it's still kind of for this other thing. I don't know that, like, I don't know. Sorry, I'm at a loss.
Yeah, no, I understand. I think I understand your reaction to the question, but I can't help but wonder, like, then don't you, is there other music that occurs to you that is not for Fleet Foxes? Like, is there sort of a bubble of song ideas somewhere that you're like, okay, if I were doing something other than Fleet Foxes, it would be, I would make this music.
I think that if I think about other projects, I think often during the course of making an album, I'll be like, oh, I want to do just an album that's just all chill, classical guitar and singing really quiet, and that would be cool to have a whole album like that. I'll think, oh, it'd be great to do a whole album with like, a brass ensemble playing like, crazy parts through the whole thing, or oh, it'd be cool to do like just a big pop album or whatever. But then what ends up happening is that the best of those impulses kind of just make it onto the album and give the album that variety. So I think whatever other projects would be, it would really just be teasing out elements that are already in the albums already, because there are not that many places that I would want to go musically aside from like composing or doing more instrumental stuff. There aren't that many places I would feel compelled or to go musically that aren't kind of already in this discography. You know.
Talk to me about lyric writing and sort of how your approach to that has evolved, from yeah, even going back to when you first started writing tunes. How do you do it, and where in the process does that happen? I know for this group of songs you've said it happened kind of at the end of things, but is that how it usually works?
Well, yeah, for me, melody is always the main, you know, the driving factor. I feel like I'll hold on to things that have really certain strong melodies, and those really determine how the lyric can develop most of the time. Even down to the level of like, this high note needs to be this syllable, or otherwise I can't sing it, I kind of know what syllables, when my voice gets into a certain range, I know what syllables those need to be. And so that is, it's kind of like, I feel like for me, lyric writing is hard to talk about because it's a little bit like doing a Rubik's Cube where you kind of don't know why you're solving it, but you are, by just moving all these different parts around and just coming to this thing, and then you end up finishing the puzzle. It's kind of like, I've never tried writing lyrics first, and I'd be curious to, but I'm sure the lyrics would be very different from what I write as in reaction to melodies, and I'm sure that the music would have to be different. The melodies would have to be a lot different, and that would be a fascinating thing to explore for that reason. But lyric writing, I guess, I wanted to be very clear on this album, and I think the last time around I was a little bit more. I wasn't that comfortable with what I was talking about on the previous album, and so I kind of couched it in some certain allusions and references that kind of kept people at arm's length, because I wasn't really comfortable, because it kind of came out of a dark time, and this one was not really that way. I wanted to be very clear. I want to be like, a lot of proper names right away, just like, these are humans in the world, these are, this is what I want to talk about, and I think, like, being, I'll have ideas for lyrical problems to solve, like how can I be clear in a way that's not, that doesn't feel wrong? How can I stick this landing on this, like, happy musical idea that doesn't feel corny, or, that it's always kind of, what's the problem that needs solving, and how do I get it there in a way that feels comfortable, lyrics are less of an intuitive thing to me than music, where I do love sitting down and just playing guitar for an hour, singing gibberish, and just opening some door to another world, or whatever, however that ends up feeling.
Who are the lyricists that you've sort of studied the most to kind of divine some wisdom from?
Oh man, well, I really like John. I got really into John Prine, just that his humor and his how much personality he has. Joanna Newsom, I think, was like, her whole musical approach is like absolutely incredible to me. I think it's just something no one else could ever do, and it's very brave and very, like, wonderful. I'm happy to be alive at the same time as that stuff. That's like, but that's like, nobody can, you can't attempt to kind of recreate that. Nobody else can do that. The way she makes her lyrics have so much content, yet remain so melodic and be so perfectly matched to what's happening musically is the main inspiration. Less so maybe at this point than kind of how perfectly dense and kind of poetic it is, But I don't know. I feel like I have a lot more musical influences than I have lyrical influences because for the reasons I was saying of just the lyrics are like this, you're trying to fit as much meaning as you can into this kind of strict crossword puzzle almost,
It sounds to me like the analogy I've come up with for your creative process in the course of this conversation is that it's like kind of parkour. It's sort of like the playground, the monkey bars, the layout of them, you know, and every time you're sort of trying to figure out the parkour to do to get across the playground based on the familiar structures that are there.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like I've even noticed kind of like settling into certain album sequencing things in terms of like song 2 being the single, song 4 being mellower than song 3, song 7 being moving in a certain way. Just certain things about like structures of an album that I'm kind of like, with Shore making a 15 song record that kind of had those elements in there, but in kind of hit those beats in different ways. There's certain things like that I'm always trying to kind of like reckon with, or kind of how do you work within these formats but keep it fresh and keep it interesting. And I think like obviously there are routes you can take where you just ignore all of that stuff and just make something like unclassifiable, but there are certain things about structures and forms that have developed that I think are kind of more like naturally occurring than they are kind of man-made. They just kind of arise out of people's preference or just how people experience things in time. And so I don't, it's always trying to balance those things. So, experimentation and pushing yourself with kind of respecting why certain forms exist at all,
I don't know. You're probably not capable of analyzing this objectively, but yeah. Do you think that Shore is the best work you've done yet?
It was the most fun to do. I felt the most like powerful making it, I guess. It was so just like, aside from, the moments where you're like, praying for lyrics to come or something, or, but there was a lot about it that was very, very directed and very kind of like, this is what's going to happen. This is how, I'm going to ask this person, this person, this person, this studio, this studio, this studio, execute it, work day after day after day after day, just working. And, so that was I feel very happy with the process. And I think like the things on the record that I'm most proud of are the things that felt the most kind of heaven sent or something, like Sunblind or Featherweight, or songs that kind of came out of nowhere and just kind of just started writing themselves. And so I think like as far as like getting to the point where I figured out the balance of kind of really concerted daily work while also, knowing and waiting for those kind of charmed moments to arise out of that work, it's definitely my favorite recording experience. I don't know, I was thinking about like people will talk to me about like the second Flea Boxes record, Helplessness Blues, about how much that meant to them when they were at a certain age, or going through similar things as like what that album was expressing. And I'm like, there's no way I would never make an album that was going through those same things again, because I won't ever go through those same things again. I won't be 24 years old reckoning with those things again, And so you can make an album that you think is better and it remains true to where you're at, but if, there are things like that will you can ever only hope to happen once,
Yeah, although I can imagine a few years from now or some years from now when people have perspective on Shore, that people who were in their mid-30s when it came out will say similar things to you about this album. So,
And that's one of the things that's like so gratifying to me about this career thing is like I'm able to like grow up, make music, release it every couple of years, and if there are people that are receptive to that music, we're kind of growing up together, and you're getting to engage with people over a lifetime, and it's I can hear from people that the music was meaningful to them at a certain time, or they attached it to a certain memory, and then that's like just such a gratifying thing to hear back from people about what you put into the world.
Well, thank you, Robin, so much for connecting to do this.
Take care.
All right, I'm Jenny Eliscu. That brings us about to the end of episode 56 of LSQ. Thanks again to Robin Pecknold for his time and candor, and thank you, dear listener, for doing just that. Episode 57, out in a few more weeks, features a conversation with one of my favorite people, Vampire Weekend bassist Chris Baio, whose excellent new album on his own as Baio, Dead Hand Control, just came out today. And hit me up at JennyLSQ on Twitter or Instagram if you've got questions or feedback. I'll talk to you next time.